So very excited to welcome our next guest here to Off the Podium. We always get excited to talk about bobsleigh and the athletes that compete in it. I have a four-time Olympian on the show today, an Olympic gold medalist, an Olympic bronze medalist, and at least at the time of hitting the record button on this interview today, the freshly retired four-time Olympian, Olympic gold medalist, and Olympic bronze medalist. It's a massive pleasure to welcome Off the Podium, Justin Kripps. Justin, welcome to the show today and happy retirement.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. And yeah, it's feeling pretty fresh being retired, but yeah, feeling good about it.
Do you ever think that when you're younger that you're going to be retired at the age of 35? I mean, it's a nice age. I'm 35 and I'm not quite yet retired, so I'm kind of jealous. This sounds like a nice life from now on.
Yeah, I mean, it's always funny like that we call it retirement. It's I probably won't be moving down to Palm Springs quite yet, and just being out on the golf course and hitting the happy hours and going to sleep at 6 p.m. There's probably some more work in my future and other projects I'll be doing, but yeah, I mean, it feels cool to feel really good about a chapter of your life and close the door on it, and still be, like you say, only 35 and have lots of time to do other things.
It's interesting you mentioned sort of like, the usual way of retiring there, Palm Springs, all those fun places. I believe you were born in Hawaii, so you kind of started life in a location like that. So how does somebody born in Hawaii end up in BC and then end up going to the Olympics for Canada and bobsled? I mean, I don't know how many bobsledders have been born in Hawaii.
Yeah, there's probably not too many of us. Yeah, I mean, I kind of did it in reverse. I started in the warm retirement places and then slowly moved to colder and colder places. I actually have an Australian connection too. My mom's Australian, and we spent quite a
Wow.
lot of time in Sydney growing up as well. So, and in the winters, so, well, Canadian winters, Australian summers. So, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that happened and opportunities came along and I took them, and that's just sort of the way it panned out. We basically stayed in Canada for high school because the high school that we would have gone to in Hawaii, we're not in a big city out there. We're not by the resorts. We're kind of in the middle of nowhere, and it just didn't have the best school. And so we thought it would make more sense to do it in Canada. And we'd already kind of been following the Canadian curriculum, and we'd take it with us when we went over to Hawaii for the winters. So it just made sense. And then because of that, I ended up going to university in Canada, in Vancouver. And that's how I ended up even kind of finding out that bobsleigh was a thing you could do. I'd seen Cool Runnings, but to me it was just movies. I didn't know anything about it. But yeah, I got recruited out of university and then went to a really cold place, Calgary, Alberta, and then got to see what actual cold weather is like, and lived the bobsleigh life for a bit. And it was a change. It was a big adjustment for me. But I had so much fun with it. I loved it. So I just kept going.
Because I believe it was a bit of a dare, wasn't it, to end up trying out for bobsleigh. This wasn't something that you kind of just, I guess, grew up wanting to do, sort of as you alluded to there. So, I mean, how do you get a dare to go try out for bobsleigh?
Well, it's one of those things that like just comes around, and you kind of, it's, for me anyway, it was so foreign of a thing. Like, not only was it a winter sport, but one that I had, absolutely zero idea about, which I think is the case for quite a lot of people, especially people in Hawaii, and likely Australia too. And so it's one of those things where you're almost like, how can I not go try this? It's just so unique and so different, that you almost have to do it. And that's what I did.
That simple. Which were you sort of growing up athletic? Were you sort of typical child trying your hand at many different sports? And was the Olympics something too that kind of, with the sports that you were maybe trying out, was a dream that you were trying to push towards?
Yeah, it was. I was, a very active kid. Being in Hawaii, we did some surfing and, skimboarding and stuff like that. Lots of running around on the beach. And my brother would chase me around too. He was older than me. So, he'd want to, steal my cookies and stuff like that. So I'd have to run away. And then, I kind of got into track and field in Canada in '96. Watched Donovan Bailey win the 100 meters in Atlanta, and I just thought it was so cool. It was just the most amazing thing, and I kind of decided I wanted to run after that. And as a little kid does, you don't really think about it too much more than that. I went outside and started running. Like that was. So I just ran as fast as I could down we kind of live in an orchard. So I'd run down the lanes of the trees. And, my dad started racing me and stuff like that. And I ended up I didn't really know about track teams. I was just a little kid. And I ended up getting into an actual track and field team at my elementary school, also in a random sort of happenstance way, because I was skateboarding at the bus stop at school, which is not allowed. You're not allowed to, skateboard at the bus stop. It was very much against the rules. And I got in trouble. And the teacher that was on duty there, Mr. Jones, he was going to take my skateboard away. And, I was kind of like, oh no, Mr. Jones, like, don't take my skateboard. Like, it's like my favorite thing. And he said, okay, well, you know what? If I won't take your skateboard, if you drop and give me 50 push-ups. I was like, okay. So I dropped, gave him 50 push-ups. And I was a little bit of a cocky kind of kid. At the time. And so I stood up and said, do you want 50 more? And he goes, no, I don't want 50 more, but I'd like you to come out for the track team. And I was like, oh, okay. So I did that. And it turned out I was, pretty quick compared to the other kids, which didn't mean a heck of a lot in Summerland because it's a very small town. But that sort of progressed, and I became really into track and field, and combining that with the Donovan Bailey kind of inspiration moment. I wanted to go to the Olympics, and that was sort of that dream. That was the beginning of the whole thing.
It really does. The more you sell this, sound like Cool Runnings. You're born on a small tropical island, you're into athletics, you want to go to the Olympics, and you end up in bobsleigh. So, I mean, seriously, Justin, I think you like Cool Runnings a little bit more than you're leading on there. It's just you're living the life of Cool Runnings.
Yeah, maybe it made such an impact on me. I unknowingly modeled my life after it.
Yeah, it just kind of happens that way. Which, with athletics, did you sort of, progress through track and field, really pursue actively sort of that Olympic dream of going to the Olympics in track and field?
Yeah, I did. I was really serious about it. I started, training what I considered to be training hard when I was probably 12 or 13. There was a local track club in Penticton, which is the town down the road, the bigger town. And yeah, I was serious about it. I started, lifting weights, and with the help of my parents, trying to like find out how you train for track and field. And I went to bigger meets down on the coast in Vancouver, and I was doing pretty well. Like I was naturally, kind of fast. So that helped with the confidence and the motivation. And I ended up getting a scholarship to university, Simon Fraser University, to run track. And I did that for a few years, and I was serious about it, and I was, okay. But at that point, we started racing down in the States quite a lot. We were in the NAIA, which is like just one of the collegiate leagues that includes some Canadian schools. And there was a lot of guys that were really, really fast down there. And so it was sort of this moment where I was like, I might not actually be able to be the best in the world at this. Like that might not be a realistic goal, or even make the Olympics. It was, kind of a moment where I was like, man, maybe I'm not as fast as I thought I was.
Which I can imagine when you're at that age and you've got all these dreams ahead of you, and this is something that you've got to focus on. It's a pretty kind of real look at yourself to switch and see kind of what you want to do. So was that sort of around that period of time where bobsled sort of entered the frame? I mean, were there other options for other sports that maybe you were thinking of? Well, if maybe I can't do track and field, but maybe I could switch these skills to something else?
Yeah, it was quite fortunate timing, really. There was some interest on the football team at the school as well. They were kind of asking me to come and try football. And this is all like I'm 18 or maybe 19 at this point. And yeah, for track, I was thinking realistically, is this something that I'll be able to do after university? It wasn't necessarily looking so good. Um, Football, I was interested in trying it, but at the time I had been to a couple football games where my home school SFU was playing. And at the time, unfortunately, they were 0-16 over the last 2 seasons.
Wow.
And I watched a couple of my friends on the football team just get their heads absolutely taken off while they were playing, like just tackled so hard, ear hold. I was kind of like, I don't know, it's baby, but, and right around that time, I was approached by a recruiter from the bobsleigh team just at a track meet I was running at, and he was literally just kind of at the finish line. And it was, he told me about it, and I kind of told my friends, and, it was kind of like a random dare to go do it, or, they encouraged me to do it. Why not? And so it was just kind of at this perfect time where I went out and I met all of these awesome people. Like bobsleigh is a, relatively small sport. So when I went to this camp, I was in the like development section, but you got to meet all of the World Cup team, and it was in 2006. So it was just after an Olympics. This was like the summer of 2006, and the Olympics would have been in February or March or whatever. And so you're kind of meeting all these Olympians, and like I'd never really met an Olympian before, not a current one anyway. And just a great group of guys, and it seemed like such a cool sport. And after that camp, they were like, well, you have a lot of potential to be good at this. We would like to send you to Europe for the winter, and you can learn the sport, kind of do the development circuit. And I was like, it just seemed like such an adventure and such a cool opportunity that I decided to do it.
Insane how that can all sort of play out. And I guess, I mean, a slight little bonus, I'm sure it entered your mind knowing that the next Olympics were literally in your own backyard as well. So a slight benefit there if you think, well, okay, if I'm kind of good at this, I could be going to my first Olympics in my hometown, essentially.
Yeah, it was actually super funny because I was invited to the bid announcement, or I don't know what you call it. It was a big gathering at BC Place in Vancouver, which is a huge stadium. It's like 60,000 people. And it was live streamed in, the IOC announcing who was going to get awarded the 2010 Olympics. And for me at the time, I think it was probably 2003 or two or something like that.
Yeah, 2003. Yep.
Yeah. So I had never even considered being in the Winter Olympics in any capacity. And the only reason I was invited was because I was just sort of part of the sports scene as like a sort of national level track athlete, like junior track athlete. And so I remember, this announcement, and like everybody was celebrating, and I was like, wow, that's going to be so cool having the Olympics in Vancouver, which is where I was living. Not even remotely thinking that I could compete in them. And then fast forward to, I think it was either that first year, 2006, that I started bobsleigh. I think it was that first year. I was sitting in a car with my pilot at the time, Lyndon Rush, who I'd been kind of paired up with, and the two other guys. And he said, this team is pretty good. Like, this is the first kind of fast pushing team I've had. Like, if we work really hard, we could make the Olympics in 2010. And I was kind of like, what? Like, in 4 years we could make the Olympics? And he was like, yeah, like we could. And I was like, that was kind of this moment where I was like, wow, I mean, what a goal to work towards, being able to, in a short amount of time, go to a hometown Olympics. Like, just amazing. And that was all the motivation I needed.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that turnaround. I mean, I remember I was 6 when Sydney got the Olympics, and just the way that takes over a country and the excitement that you've got in a 7-year period, and then obviously the Olympics coming on. But as you're saying there, being involved in that excitement, being in a completely different sport that wouldn't see you in those Olympics, and then kind of having that journey. It's insane. I always love finding out from people in bobsled your first time in the sled, particularly, having not really having that winter background. I mean, do you remember that first experience, Justin, getting in that sled and what it was like?
Yeah, I do. It was like, it's so hard to describe. It's so much crazier than it looks on TV. Like, it looks kind of crazy on TV, but being in the sled, especially in the back of the sled where you can't see what's going on and you don't have any control over what's happening, it's absolutely insane. I remember going down, and just before I went down, some of the national team guys that I started to befriend were telling me about the track and like what I was going to feel, and they kept talking about Kreisel, which is it's Kreisels are circles, is German word for circle, and there's a bunch of tracks in the world that have these Kreisel corners, and Calgary is one of them, and that's where I did my first run. And they were saying, you're going to really, you'll know when you're there because the G-force is crazy. Like, it just presses you right down into the bottom of the sled. And so I'm thinking, okay, like that's going to be my marker. Cause like I had to pull the brakes at the end too, right? Like it was a 2-man sled. I was on the brakes. So I was going to do this thing for the first time. And then I actually had like a job I had to do at the end, which was like actually important too. So you don't go flying off the end of the track.
Just slightly important. Yeah.
So I'm thinking about this, and I remember getting in the sled and thinking like, wow, like this is pretty fast. And we were in, corner 1 at that point. So we were going, maybe 65, and we were about to go 130 plus. And so we're going, and your head's down, right? I'm not looking. And I remember thinking to myself after maybe 10 seconds or so, like, oh man, this must be Kreisel, because I was getting like pushed into the bottom of the sled. And so I'm like, okay. And I'm trying to like count the corners. And then we hit the Kreisel, and I was like absolutely flattened into the bottom of the sled. And like, it's one of these things where like, how often do you experience G-force in your life? Like never. It's just it's a crazy feeling for the first time. So I remember just being flattened, and it's like all crazy, and, you're getting shaken around, and you're kind of bouncing off the side of the sled. And I had no idea where we were at that point. Like, all of the counting was gone, no idea. And then I sort of like, I hear this yelling, right? And in my mind, it goes to this video that my pilot Lyndon had showed me before we went to the track that day. And it was him in Altenburg, which is this track in East Germany. And it's a video from outside the track, and he comes by and crashes, and you can hear him like yelling in the sled as he's crashing. And so he's yelling, and I'm thinking, oh no, we're going to crash, because that's like what was in my mind. But he was like, hit the brakes. And so I kind of like, I realized like we're not crashing. It was it was the least violent part of the entire run, because we were in the braking stretch at this point. And so I kind of looked up, and I realized, and I hit the brakes, and it was fine. We stopped like in a reasonable amount of time. But I remember it just being like I was so blown away by how crazy it was. It was not at all what I was expecting. And then those moments continued, because I got used to going down the track, but it was just this, like, bobsleigh is a lot of work. Like, it's a grind. Like you say, I went from, growing up in Hawaii, and then, I had winters in Summerland and Vancouver, which are not cold places by Canadian standards. And then, I'm on this bobsleigh tour, and you're outside, like it's minus 40, and you're trying to like screw in these things on the sled, because like we do pretty much all of our sled work. And it was just this like crazy experience that really, like it almost like toughened me up in a way. Like I was like, wow, this is a real challenge. Like this is hard. And I'm going to push through. I'm going to do it. Cause I had that goal, and I learned to love it.
Incredible story. Is it also kind of like when you a kid and you go to a water park and you go down a water slide for the first time, you're a bit scared, you're a bit nervous, you get to the bottom, you splash, you're like, fuck, I want to do that again. Come on, let's go. And you're just taking the sled right back up to the top and go, come on, let's do this again.
Yeah, it's like, it's kind of like that, except that you're nervous to go down, but you almost, if you knew what it was like, you would be more nervous and more like, you should actually probably be scared of it because it's so crazy. But it is like, it's a huge rush, and you kind of like when you do the first one, it's like you have no idea what's happening. So then you want to do it again and like try to feel the corners and like kind of actually understand what's happening. And so it is like it's it's kind of fun in that like adrenaline rush sort of way. Although I would never really call sitting in the back of the sled fun because it is so rough. Like it's
Yeah.
just so rough back there.
Which I
Driving is
can
very fun though.
you're in control that way, of course. You're sort of a bit more different. Which and is it? I can imagine a different experience when you're the brakeman with just one guy in front of you versus three guys in front of you as well. Because that I can imagine when you're in the four man as a brakeman is completely different to a two man.
Yeah, for sure. And it almost adds like a new sort of skill that you have to do. Like in the foreman, it's really, really important to get the like the shape of the all of the bodies in the right aerodynamic position, which is difficult because it's, you know, it's a lot of big guys in a small sled, and you need to hold these uncomfortable positions and fight to hold those positions. Whereas the two man, you know, it's basically just get as low as you can, and it's not super hard because there's nothing in your way. But four man, you really have to like trust and work together with your teammates, because if somebody, you know, it sounds funny saying like, you know, there's these like big tough bobsled guys, but like if somebody gets scared in the sled, which nobody will ever admit, but it does happen, they start to kind of tense up and change their position and get lower, and that kind of ruins the position for everybody else because they're taking up more room lower in the sled. And then the person further back that's supposed to be lower gets kind of pushed up a bit higher. So it's this real kind of teamwork thing that nobody really knows is going on, but you're very much like working as a unit inside the sled.
Which I'd love you to clear something up for me, Justin, just while we're on the topic of this. You've got the driver in the four man, you've got the brake man, the two middlemen. What the fuck are they actually doing besides pushing it really fast? They're just having a free ride down to the bottom of the hill and they just get a free medal at the end of it because they've just done the least work. I mean, clear this up for us non-bobsledders here, Justin, about what those two men do in that sled.
Yeah, I mean it's a very misunderstood thing, because you know a lot of people don't even really understand the athletic part of pushing the sled. Like it's a very very explosive movement in sport. Like you have to be. Some of the guys are like world class level power athletes. Like could take on an NFL running back head to head in a sprint, and that kind of thing at the same body weights. But beyond the athletic component, if you're at the sort of development level or the lower end, they more or less are just going along for the ride when they go down. But that's not what they're supposed to be doing. What they're supposed to be doing is holding this aerodynamic position, because it makes a massive difference. And it's even hard to explain that to the crewmen sometimes, because it's such a violent experience being in the sled. And it's so almost unfathomable that like you being a half inch lower could be the difference between a gold medal and coming sixth. But that is the case. So you really have to spend a lot of time finding these positions, and it has to work for the people, right? Like if everybody's 5'5", it's going to be different than if everybody's 6'5". You have to find like the right shape that works for the people. And then it's really about them like fighting to maintain that position and also working together to maintain that position. Because the more that they can sort of achieve like 100% perfection in that position, which, is never really going to happen. But anytime you're like 99, 100%, there's just less drag. And anytime there's less drag, you're just slowing the sled down less. And so you end up building up a higher top speed. And it's like, what I had going on with my four-man team the past 4 years was exactly that. Like we were the best in the world at maintaining that position for the longest amount of time. And you can see it in when you start to couple that with, good driving and good equipment, you start to be like the fastest at the bottom of the track. And that's kind of what we did. And so that's their sort of unsung hero job, is that you can't see it at all. Like it's not like in other sports, you if you do something really well, it's like obvious, right? And like people like cheer about it and instantly, stuff like that. This is like nobody sees it happening unless it's like completely terrible. Nobody sees it when you're good at it, but it can very much be the difference between a good result and a terrible result.
It's fascinating to hear that, because it's always great when you hear little things like that, as you say, that you don't really see. I know that we've learned a lot through luge athletes on this show about the subtle movements that they're making in order to get fine lines and steering and everything along those lines. And it almost sounds like it's similar to, say, synchronized diving or synchronized swimming, that you've got to be so in sync with each other in order to just get those minuscule seconds. So I think I maybe owe the second and third man apology in all four-man bobsled teams. I'm just saying they're just along for a free ride there, Justin. Clearly they're not. They're kind of important.
Yeah, they are very important. And it's one of those things where you have to really have all the pieces of the puzzle. Like it takes a long time to become a good bobsleigh driver, like a world-class bobsleigh driver. And it takes less time to get good at sitting properly in the sled, but it is equally as important. And it's so it's hard because there's no feedback. Like when I drive, I can tell if I'm kind of on the right line or not. There's feedback in my hands and my body. Like I can feel if momentum is going sideways or straight ahead. And it's, instant feedback. But for them, it's like, if your shoulder starts to creep up half an inch, you can't really tell, like you can't feel anything different, but then your time is slow. And I'm not going to know who it was right away either. So you have to like analyze these videos and, really get a sense, have everybody really be able to feel when they're in the right position, because there's no feedback, and it makes it super difficult to do.
Yeah, that's insane. And just the footage that you're obviously watching and just the things you're having to pay attention to, that's absolutely crazy. Vancouver, you're part of the four-man, ultimately finished fifth. We always love to find out from our guests that first Olympics, that experience, and particularly when you qualified and you knew you were going and you were selected, going all the way back to 96, you're watching Donovan Bailey, you've got this dream of going to an Olympics, and then fast forward, you've made it, as we said, a home Olympics. I mean, do you remember that moment? And sort of at what point was it that it kind of hit you that you were an Olympian?
Yeah, I do remember that moment. I'm pretty sure I remember the date, even it was my brother's birthday, January 17th. And I think we were in Austria when they sort of did the final team announcement. The thing that is especially, weird in bobsleigh, especially like at that time I was a brakeman. Your driver qualifies like by name for the Olympics, and then you are sort of like nominated or selected by the national team to race with that person. So I remember when like our team was for sure going to qualify. Like I was racing with Pierre Luders at the time, and he was qualified to go to the games, but it wasn't like 100% sure that our team was going to be what it was. And there was actually like changes going on during the season, because you always have these situations in the Olympic year where, there's, say for that games, we had 6 spots for brakemen because we had 2 sleds qualified, 3 per sled. And there was probably legitimately 10 people in the running for those 6 spots.
Wow.
And so you're kind of like, and we were in subsequent games, it's been like more sure who's going and who's not and which sled they're going to be in. But in these ones, there was some new, really phenomenal athletes that had just come out the year before. I was relatively new myself, that was my 4th season. And we were moving around people between sleds and also positions in sleds. So we were like kind of constantly doing these tryouts, and, like somebody would get sent home after a bad performance, and, then it'd be down to like 9 in the running for these 6 spots. And so it was very like, it was pretty stressful. And like some people really, really struggled with that and had, we kind of like, I call it, I say to my guys now, like every Olympic season, almost half the team is gonna kind of go crazy and like lose it and kind of buckle under the pressure. And that happens big time. And people start to, their performance suffers, their sort of, mental health suffers, and it becomes like a really difficult situation. And I was like keeping a pretty cool head. And I was like, I thought pretty focused and centered, but I was watching this like chaos unfold around me where there's these conflicts, people are fighting, like there's sort of this division in the team. There's one of the women's pilots and one of the men's pilots were sort of like in a clique, and then the other two were in this other clique, and the brakemen hated each other, and it was like it's kind of a crazy time. And
You did
so
a
I
reality show on
remember, yeah,
that.
totally. I mean, yeah, there 100% should have been. Bobsleigh would be a great reality show because it is like it has everything, and then you heighten the all of it by having like this fear factor of going down the track because it's like scary sometimes.
Yeah.
The fear of crashing and all that stuff. So it is a great drama. But yeah, so I remember when I was, like officially selected for the team, it was just this like, mix of like relief and like accomplishment, but then also knowing that like you haven't done it yet, like you have to still race at the games and, hopefully put together a good performance. But yeah, I got this like really great sense of achievement that like the goal was, on its way at least to being complete. I've been selected, and it felt amazing. And me and the four guys, um, especially this one brakeman, Jesse Lumsden, we were kind of both new to this, and we'd been moving around positions, and we were like, we talked a lot about, just pushing through how like difficult it was and challenging, and achieving this goal. And when we did, it was kind of this moment where we're like, all right, we did it. Like, but also now the real work begins in actually trying to put together a good race. So it was a pretty amazing moment, amidst like so much chaos.
Mm. Which all the way back to being in BC Place for the announcement to then walking out, in BC Place in an opening ceremony and a closing ceremony representing your country. I mean, that's just an insane journey. But as I said, fifth, obviously your first Olympics, through all of what you're saying, it's kind of getting over that. I'm in the Olympics. That's now got to switch focus to business. I mean, did you guys sort of set yourself a goal? Was it sort of medal? Was fifth satisfactory? Kind of, how do you look back at Vancouver, your first Olympics, with how you actually went?
Yeah, I mean, I think like, looking back, it was a disappointing result because we had one of the best, like most legendary pilots in the sport in Pierre Luters. And we had quite a good team, although we were all pretty new. Um, and a home track on a very difficult track. So that gives you a big advantage. But what I didn't know then that I do know now after driving for so many years is that we did not have a good sled. And there were these new 4-man sleds that had been coming out over the last couple of years at the time. And for whatever reason, I don't know if it was you know, like a relationship thing, or if Pierre didn't think that those sleds were as good as people thought they were or whatever. But either way, we didn't have one. We had something else, something quite a bit older. I think it was the same sled that Pierre had raced in 2006 in, which is starting to get like, even now for me, like having a sled for more than 4 years is pretty rare for it to be like, very competitive. So we did not really have a good chance in that we didn't have a good sled. All the people who won medals there had either that new sled or the American that won, they had built kind of their own sled in conjunction with like Podium, which is a NASCAR kind of company. So I think, it was this, for me, I was just really happy that I had qualified and raced in the games. And I thought I had, performed pretty well, and coming fifth in your first games is great. I just, I think I know that our pilot was disappointed because he knew we could have done better. So it was a little bit of mixed emotions. Like I was celebrating home Olympics and such an amazing experience, but also like the other Canadians had won a bronze medal, and I was like just so thrilled with them. And I saw like all of the stuff that they did. And it was so amazing. And like, I really, wanted that in the future. And so, yeah, it was a very, a time of mixed emotions for sure.
I love these things that you clearly are wanting in the future, and you go and set and achieve them there, Justin. I mean, obviously, we're going to get to what happens 8 years later, but you switch after Vancouver from a brakeman to a pilot, which is that something that is commonly done? Is that kind of the progression? You start off as a brakeman and move your way up to a pilot, or was there something more to this that you thought, well, no, I want to give this a crack now?
Yeah, it is somewhat common, especially these days. Like all sports, it's evolved, and the pilot position kind of used to be not an athletic position. It was kind of just a guy who had driven a lot and very good at driving, but it was not it was not athletic. But then people started to become very good drivers and who were very athletic, and then all of a sudden you kind of have two guys pushing the sled, or four guys instead of three or one. And that advantage you get on the start, if you have two or four really good athletes pushing it is massive and game changing. So that sort of became the norm, is trying to get your Olympic level brakeman, or close to Olympic level brakeman, driving, and see if anybody has a knack for it. And then you might end up with a really good athlete who's also a good driver, and that's kind of that's where the sport is now. All the drivers are quite athletic. So for me, it was like a confluence of events. I thought that driving looked really fun. It was this whole thing that I had no idea about. Pierre would sort of talk to us a little bit about it, but he'd been driving for 20 years at that point or something like that. So, his level of experience and expertise in it was just so far beyond what we were even thinking about. But he told me that he was going to retire, and he thought I should try driving. He thought that I would, have a good chance of being good at it, just because of the way he saw me sort of approach different things. Like, I was methodical and analytical, and I like to try to understand what's going on with the sled and the driving and stuff like that. And so he said he was interested in coaching, and he would coach me for a while and sort of teach me the fundamentals or whatever. So I thought, sure, let's go try this out. So it was only a few weeks after 2010, I went down to Lake Placid and did a driving school. And then the sort of plan was that Pierre was going to coach the development team the next season. And so after I sort of, smashed my way down the track for a few weeks in Lake Placid, I'd start to learn from, Pierre, who's like one of the best ever. And when I went down to Lake Placid, it was just so much fun. Like, I went with Jesse Lumsden, who was on the same team as me in 2010. And, we're in these old shit bucket sleds, like they're rusted out, like they're just, terrible. And we're excited, but also like, we've been sliding with one of the best pilots of all time, and it's still crazy in the back of the sled. So we're kind of thinking like, what's it going to be like with us driving these things? So we're kind of like, stuffing yoga mats down each other's backs and like wearing pads and things like that. And it was pretty fun and chill. Like, we would just do a bunch of runs per day. We'd switch off, like, so he would drive, then I would drive, and each person would break for the other one. And then, we'd go and have some beers after, and we were celebrating becoming Olympians still. And so, like, it was a really fun trip, and just, I guess, getting a sense for going down the track. Like, it was really fun driving. Like, the sled was, looking back, it was crazy. Like, if you pulled too hard to the left, it wouldn't return back to neutral, which just like makes it really hard to drive, but we didn't know any different. So I don't think we even crashed or anything. Like, we had some really big hits in the walls, and like, it was super rough, but I went to the top. Like, I progressed. So we start like, way down the track and just sort of go down super slow, and then move up a little bit and go down super slow. And then I went to the top, and I did like a couple of runs from there. And I kind of thought, like, I feel like I could get good at this. Like, I was reasonably calm in the sled, and like, because a lot of people sort of panic, right? Like it does get pretty insane sometimes, and Lake Placid is a difficult track. But I thought, maybe I had a shot at being good at this. So when I got back to Calgary, I sat down with the coaches and I said, yeah, like I want to go ahead and give this a go for a few years. And, if I end up being terrible, I'll just go back to being a brakeman. And we had quite a few good drivers at the time in the program. So everybody was on board with the plan. And yeah, I set off and became a driver.
Did all right, pretty well from that point on, I think.
Yeah.
Obviously, making your way up. Go back to Sochi again in 2014, where you compete in both the 2 and the 4-man, which I mean, on paper it seems like a logical choice. You're in the 4-man, split you guys in half, go and do the 2-man. But was that always the plan? Because I believe you were in the 2-man, and then obviously did the 4-man come afterwards, or were you always sort of planned to be in both in Sochi?
Yeah, it's planned to be in both, assuming that I qualified for both. So like, I mean, normally how it works when you learn how to drive, you start with 2-man because it's easier and you're going to like hurt less people when when you crash. Um, but yeah, it is like the 2-man is a lot easier to kind of like control and save from crashing. You have more grip and there's less sort of like top heavy weight just because you don't have all the people in the back. So like when I went into Sochi, I felt like I was getting reasonably good at 2-man. I was inconsistent, but I could lay down some pretty solid runs, and I'd been on the World Cup for a bit, and I actually won a World Cup right before Sochi in the 2-man, which like surprised everybody, including myself. Because I really had no business winning a World Cup in my 4th year of driving. That's quite rare, and I certainly didn't repeat that for a while. But the 4-man was still pretty new to me, and also, that year I was the 3rd ranked Canadian pilot, and the other 2 were, pretty much for sure going to qualify. And I think, Lyndon had a pretty good chance of doing well. And Chris Spring he was doing quite well. I think he got a number of medals that year. So he was having a really good season. And for me, it was really about qualifying for the games. That was the big goal, at least when the season started. Once we got to Christmas, I was kind of doing a lot better than expected. And so I was kind of thinking, well, maybe I can, do a little better. Like I'm pretty sure I'm going to qualify. But it was like 2-man focused, because 4-man, I was not having good results. I was, 10th plus all the time. Like I was going to qualify, but didn't look like a good result. But then at the games, I didn't have any runs in Sochi at all, really, because I didn't get sent to the international training event because it was sort of like I was new and I didn't really have or at least people didn't think I had like a chance at winning a medal. And so, it's really expensive to send, 4-man sled over there and 2-man sled and all this stuff. So I didn't really have any runs on the track, but I just kind of clicked with it. And I was just like, kept being the fastest Canadian sled down the track in training. And then in the 2-man race, I finished as the top Canadian sled. And we were actually like in the mix for a medal in the 2-man. And so then after we did 2 days of 4-man training, and again, I was the fastest Canadian sled. And so the team decided to make me the top sled and give me the top guys, top equipment. And like, I'm an athlete, professional. I was like, challenge accepted. But like at the same time, I was like, I had like no runs down this track. And like, I was just kind of nailing this like really difficult section, just like constantly. Although I messed it up in the 2-man in the last run and sort of like threw it away, which we'll come back to later. But so in the 4-man, we had this new team, and my old team was like kind of crushed that they weren't going to finish the journey that we'd started together. And I felt the same way, but I was kind of like, my mindset was, like, let's worry about that later. Like, we've got a job to do here. Like, let's just, move forward. And so I got the new guys, and they were excited because it looked like if we left the teams the same, none of us had a chance to win a medal. But if we stacked my team, we had like a Hail Mary outside shot if I managed to, put 4 runs together, because those guys were pushing really fast, and we had some good equipment, and I had some good training runs. But I ended up crashing in spectacular fashion. And so it was after Sochi, it was, I said before, like every Olympic season, people go crazy.
Yeah.
That season was nuts, because we had like 3 really competitive teams, and there was a lot of personality conflicts between brakemen and pilots and men's and women's teams. And the whole thing was just very tumultuous and stressful. Like, it was not like a cohesive unit as far as like Team Canada bobsleigh. Between the athletes, it was pretty crazy. And so after, the pilot who essentially had his team taken away and given to me, he was really upset and devastated. And I was upset and devastated because I crashed. Like, I feel like I let everybody down. And it was just this period of time where I was like, how can I be like so good in one race? In the World Cup before the Sochi Olympics, like in the 2-man, I won the World Cup. Like, how can I go from that to at the games, like completely throwing it away in the final run of the 2-man? And later on, after Russian disqualifications and stuff, I would have had a medal if I had held on to that position.
Wow.
And then like crashing in the 4-man, like I was kind of like, oh my God, like what happened? And I kind of had this realization that like Sochi and Vancouver, the Olympics, like happened to me. Like, I was obviously there and competing, whatever, but like I had this sense that like the whole thing sort of unfolded, and I was almost like a spectator. Like, I didn't feel like I really went in knowing how to like compete at my best. And it's just like, there's so much more that goes into the Olympics than just your sport, because there's all this pressure and media attention, and you don't get a lot of that in bobsleigh, especially at the time. I certainly didn't. And then all of a sudden it's like this huge thing, and you like really, really want to do well. And it's almost like the more you want it and care about it, the harder it becomes to achieve it, because you're just like almost sabotaging yourself mentally, because you just care so much, and you're overthinking things, and you're trying to make things happen. Like in the 2-man in Sochi, I remember going into the 4th run, and I was thinking about like, I had to do something different, because the guys in front of me, the top 3 sleds, were not going to like fall back to me. I had to like somehow like catch them. And that is a recipe for disaster, like probably in most sports, but for sure in bobsleigh, because like really less is more in bobsleigh driving. So like the more you like try to make things happen, just the slower you go and the more likely you are to mess up. And I messed up this key section that I had been nailing and dropped back a bunch of spots. But I mean, the positive coming out of that was that it led to this whole realization that there's this mental performance aspect that I had never even considered working on. Like for me, it was you train hard in the gym, you try to drive well down the track, you do what the coaches say, and A plus B equals C, you'll end up doing really well. But I didn't realize that, like, especially in a sport like bobsleigh, you get to the Olympics and all of a sudden it's this like massive thing. And there's these, relatively speaking, huge rewards compared to what you're normally getting, like, life changing if you get an Olympic medal. And so it just like the pressure just ramps up exponentially. And like, how can you possibly be ready to handle that if you never worked on that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
it was a blessing really, because it led me to do all of this work that completely changed how I approached my career and skills that I learned that, transfer really well to day-to-day life even.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to sort of mention with that in the lead up to Pyeongchang, going in with a bit more pressure on your shoulders, having won the World Cup title and having a breakout season in the lead up. You mentioned before about how you won that World Cup before Sochi, and okay, we'll do it again. But this is a completely different kettle of fish, and I can also imagine the attention that would have brought from the media back home in Canada. A little bit of extra thing there, but was it all that preparation that you were just talking about that kind of helped you put it all down on the track that ultimately led to that gold in Pyeongchang?
Yeah, absolutely. And like the thing that is, crazy about it, and that I feel very lucky about happening, is that, at the time, like that Sochi experience seemed like a terrible thing. But if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have likely discovered all of this, mental side of everything, mental training. And I ended up, haphazardly putting together this sort of system over a few years for myself, using meditation techniques and um, focus techniques, and just kind of building this routine where I learned how to identify what sort of mental state I was in, and then how to change it into the right mental state, and also what mental state was the right sort of headspace for me to be in to race. So it's sort of like this progression of like, okay, like I need to feel like this to perform at my best, and then okay, how do I get there, and then how do I get there from a really difficult position. Like it's the first step was sort of clearing my mind and just using meditation techniques, and that over time becomes really, really easy at home alone in your apartment to sort of enter this meditative zone state, or like a flow state. Um, and so I was like, okay, like this is a good first step kind of thing. But the reality is I don't compete at home alone in my apartment when the things that I really want to do well at, there's, 50 million people watching, and like I really, really care about the result, and there's media attention, and it's just like so much pressure versus sitting at home alone in your apartment. So I started to kind of like ramp it up into those situations. Like I would, once I had identified kind of this headspace I wanted to be in, and how to get there, I started to figure out ways to like shorten the amount of time it took to get into that headspace. So like I wouldn't do a full meditation. I would just, I had some strategies to get into that headspace quickly. And then once I had that, I would start to do it, at training, like after doing an all out sprint. So like my heart rate's up, got some adrenaline pumping, I'm out of breath, then try to get into that headspace. And then every time I went down the track, and then I would try to, like, I did some funny stuff. Like I would take like 3 scoops of pre-workout. So I was just like feeling jittery and anxious. And like, then I would try to get into that headspace and then go down the track. And, it's kind of like in that period of time. And since then too, I've realized that like, this is a thing that really successful athletes and just people in general learn how to do and practice. It's not like I thought that people were just naturally, ice cold or like really good at performing under pressure. But it's just your typical, like everything else. Once you see that person, they're at the top of their game and they've been practicing this for a long time. So it looks easy, but it is definitely something that you can work on and practice and get really good at over time. And so, using all, it's like Michael Phelps, like his coach used to smash his goggles and whatever, like try to throw him off. But it's so smart, right? Because you go to the Olympics and there's all this pressure and all these different things can happen. And you have to just be able to like execute this thing that you're really good at by just blocking everything out and just like getting out of your own way and letting it happen, and in that period of time, I developed this system to do it for myself. And so I went into 2018, like feeling so calm, like just because I knew I had these strategies to deal with whatever happened. And like, I remember going into that race, not just the start of the race, but like particularly the fourth heat, we were 600ths of a second in the lead. And the guy in second, Francesco Friedrich, like legendary bobsledder, way faster start than me, way faster sled. So like I have to be perfect. He can kind of mess up and still probably be really fast. And so you'd think it would be like this just really, really high pressure, difficult situation. And like it was, I was aware of it, but like I just was able to use my strategies and just clear my mind. And I remember standing on that start block and just being like, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. I know how to do it. My mind was clear, and I just like went and did it. And it was easy, to be honest. Like
Wow.
it was hard before it, like to get into that position where I was able to do that. But the race itself, like I just didn't think about anything. I just did my thing. And, like I had basically a perfect run, and it was amazing.
You're the first Olympic gold medalist I've ever spoken to who I think just described their gold medal win as easy. So I think you need to write a book. We write a book.
Yeah.
There's a secret in this. It's easy. Done. That's
Yeah.
how you do it.
Yeah. I mean, that minute was easy. The 4 years, well, I mean, I guess 10 years leading up to it, um, obviously a lot of work, but like that moment where I realized that you can train this mental aspect of performance, and that if you do, it's almost like having a superpower. It was just so game changing, because from, I probably got good at it like that season, probably. Like it took 3 years, maybe 4 years of kind of working at it to be like to the point where I felt like I could handle like any situation. Um, and, also I was getting pretty good at driving at that point. So it's kind of the other aspect of it. Like you have to be good at what you're doing to just, clear your mind and let your body automatically do it. It has to be, automatic. But it was, yeah, I mean, it was just like a complete game changer, because now I would go into these situations where before, like I'd be, really thinking about it, and I'd be thinking about the result and, how much it would mean if I did this. And I changed that to just like clearing my mind. I had the tools to do it, and just getting out of my own way and just like letting myself perform the way that I could, while other people sort of dropped away. And it was just, yeah, I mean, it was an incredible realization. And it's so, I mean, it's kind of like now I'm retired now. I'm trying to like put together a way to like teach that to other people, like it's
Good
different for
idea.
everybody. I would imagine, like my exact system isn't going to work, but the idea behind it, I think the fundamentals are the same. Like those first steps I took, where you learn how to like be aware of the mental state you're in, and then develop tools to change that into the mental state that you want to be in. It's just so useful. Like it doesn't matter if it's sports or business or a job interview or public speaking or whatever it is, like that ability to recognize your headspace and then be able to adjust it to what you need it to be is life changing.
Yeah, and I'm telling you now, if you do write the book on this, I mean, I'm signing up to it right now. I want a copy of this because you're inspiring me to. And I also, the fact of the matter is that you've worked on all of this to the fine tuning point that when you win your gold, you win it in a tie. So I mean, you've honed this into the point where you've gone, well, let's share the love. Let's have four of us win a gold medal and share this mindset with our German friends at the same time. So I mean, that's just some really fine tuning there, Justin, that I think that is going to look great in a book or whatever you decide to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is such a magical moment, just like a confluence of so many different events and hard work. And And with the guys that we tied with as well, like a lot of people don't know it, but he had a really terrible Sochi as well. So he went into Sochi as the world champion, and I think he came ninth in the 2-man and somewhere back in the 4-man as well. And he dominated pretty well for since Sochi until Pyeongchang. So nobody was really surprised that he did well. But I remember that disappointment that he had in Sochi. I remember seeing it on him, and we were kind of just getting to know each other. Like we were both new on the World Cup, but I remember that, and I remember seeing how hard he worked and how hard I worked, and for us to end up tying and both getting gold medals, it was like it's like a fairy tale, like a storybook.
Yeah, which is crazy. Just everything that came from that. The breakthrough for Canada after a bit of a drought too, to get that gold as well. And you sort of mentioned before about life-changing moments, and I love that explanation. You say that 60 seconds, it was easy, you knew you were doing, but 60 seconds, it changes your life on so many ways. And again, way back to 1996, you've achieved exactly what you watched Donovan Bailey doing as well. And obviously that led into Beijing, the 4-man, the bronze, creating history as the first Canadian pilot to win a medal in both the 2-man and 4-man. I mean, now that you're retiring and you reflect on all these things that you've achieved, do you sometimes just take yourself back to that young boy watching Donovan Bailey and just pinch yourself sometimes that here you are now with an amazing career behind you, that you achieved exactly what Donovan did, nearly 30 years ago?
Yeah, I mean I do for sure. It's not lost on me at all. Like it it feels almost like a dream, like you set these goals, and like the goals weren't specifically what I achieved, they were it's like that diagram people think success goes like this, but it actually goes, squiggly
Yeah.
line like that. It was very much like that for me. And there's, key moments in there that led to it, taking opportunities, accepting challenges, and working really, really hard. Like it was a lot of work. Like I pushed myself further than I ever thought I could or would, and learn things about myself that, I didn't know. But yeah, to come out of it with these medals and just such an amazing experience, it's pretty wonderful. And like, I'm not like 100% sure what's next for me in detail, but like, I would like to be a part of helping some other athletes get that, because the devil really is in the details, I had an amazing career and journey, and I would feel that way, I think, even if I didn't win any of these medals, because, it was a big adventure, and I met a lot of lifelong friends, and I had a great time. But the difference between winning the medals and not is like so small. And it is life-changing. Like sometimes people say like, winning an Olympic medal doesn't change your life. And like, it's true in the sense where, I just watched the PGA Tour Championship and the winner got $18 million. So like, it's not like that at all.
Damn.
If
Wrong
you,
sport.
yeah, rats. Like if you win your Olympic medal and you go home and you put it in your drawer and you like don't talk to anybody anymore or whatever, like it's not going to change your life. But the amount of doors it opens up and opportunities it gives you, I mean, like, saying that it's not life changing, I think is pretty crazy. Like the opportunities I've gotten are just innumerous, and I consider myself really lucky. And you have to be good to be lucky, but like those hundredths of a second that were the difference, like to put it in perspective, in Pyeongchang we tied for gold, and third place was 400ths of a second behind us. So that means 500ths of a second and you're out of the medals completely.
Yeah.
And then in Beijing, the same thing. We won the bronze by 600ths of a second. So it's just like the margins are so small and the pressure is so high. It's
Less than
just
a blink of an
wild.
eyelid, that isn't it? Like that, you can blink basically slower than that. That's insane, that time.
Yeah, and that's why like I feel like I kind of came to this realization that, during my kind of exploration of mental performance and mental training and stuff, my goal always became to arrive at the Olympics knowing truly and honestly that I had done everything I could to put myself in the best position possible to have a good result. And then after that, you just go out there and do your thing and like don't worry about it, because you did everything you could. And I think like that actually helps in a lot of ways because you realize that the work is over. Like you've done it. By the time you get there, you can't change anything about what's going to happen. Like it would usually be a mistake. You can't do a bunch of training and get faster athletically. The more you think about the track, as long as you have a pretty good program dialed in, which you should by that point, overthinking a corner is probably going to be worse than just going through on the line that you've chosen. And so that became the goal, and it just that helps too, like take the pressure off because you have to be happy with the result if you've done everything you possibly can. And like I didn't do it in a real draconian way either. Like I was holistic about it. Like I think it's a mistake to like just train yourself to death, and like sacrifice everything else. Like you need to be happy with what's going on as well. Like you're not going to perform well if you're just crushed under the pressure of like, oh my God, I've sacrificed like everything for this. And like, that's not a really good way to go into a big event like that. So, I missed some training sessions and things like that, but I knew that those decisions I made were for like the greater good,
Yeah,
not getting overtrained, feeling good about myself and things like that.
Which I love. Like I love. I'm so glad you've talked so much in depth about this, Justin, because one of my favorite parts is always learning about that mental aspect. Because, yeah, obviously people think Olympians, they think of higher, faster, stronger, and the stronger aspect, the training, everything. But there's so much that goes into that mental aspect of it that gets you over the edge. And as we've learnt with you, I mean that sounds like a massive driving force, which is absolutely incredible. Two things I just really want to touch on quickly before we let you go. You touched on the the medals, I should say. We always love finding out from our medalists, what do you do with the medals? And also, you got an even more prized possession in Beijing. You got a Bing Duen Duen. We love hearing about the Bing Duen Duens that you get because you couldn't bloody get one after Beijing. So is that more valuable than your Olympic gold and Olympic bronze medal?
Well, it was pretty funny actually, because in Beijing, when we got given that Bing Duen Duen, and we had, a special one, it has like a wreath, like
Yeah.
a metal one or whatever. All of the volunteers were like rushing us to take pictures with us once we were kind of like finished the medal ceremony. And, we were like, holding up the medals and stuff. And they're like, no, like we want the Bing Duen Duen, like, oh, okay. Like this is way more important. But yeah, no, the Bing Duen Duen is pretty cool. I managed to get one for my little cousin in Australia as well. So
Great.
that was exciting.
So there's one in Australia. There's a Bing Duen Duen outside of our own Olympic medalist.
Yeah.
There's at least one else out there. Good to know.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, with the medals, I mean, it's super cliche, but they're like in my sock drawer. It's a nice padded place. You can throw it in a sock and like put it in your pocket if you need to go to like an event where they want you to bring your medal. I think, one day it'll be in like a display case or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, you don't really like take it out and look at it that much. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those things where it's like when you get it, especially the first one, and like this one was, I don't know, it was like almost like, you'd think a gold medal is more important than a bronze medal, but like this particular bronze medal, like with these four guys that we did 4 years together and did pretty much every race together. And at the start of that 4 years, people didn't necessarily think that we would be like a great team. Like they thought people would, kind of be switched on to that team, whatever. So when we achieved it, it was just like we call it our rose gold medal because it's almost like it kind of looks rose gold in the way the bronze is, and it feels like a gold medal because it was such a hard race. Like the odds were stacked against us with, the Germans had such good equipment and everything. but yeah, it's one of those things where we like, me and the guys talk about it a lot, but like we're not really pulling out our medals and looking at them too often, so they just kind of sit in the drawer there.
As long as they're somewhere safe. Last question I've got to ask. I need to know beast mode, your nickname. Where does this come from?
I actually don't even know when that started, but I think it was because, like I had switched from being a Olympic level brakeman to being a pilot. And, for those first year or two racing on like the very, very entry level circuit, I was like a phenomenal pusher for a pilot. So like our start times were always like insane. People just started kind of calling me beast mode. And then this company from Saskatchewan, I think they're called 22 Fresh. They sent me a shirt that said beast mode, and I actually wore it
Nice.
for every 2-man race for the rest of my career. It like
Wow.
became like a lucky charm for me.
Wow. Jeez. Did they stick on board with a sponsorship? Like, I mean, otherwise, I mean, I think they would be pretty happy with that if they knew that was going on, when you're winning Olympic medals with that underneath the suit.
Yeah, no, I mean, I ended up being sponsored by Lululemon or being an ambassador for them, and
That's all right
got their
too.
logos on
They're
it too. But
decent.
like it was underneath, underneath the speed suit, I had this beast mode shirt.
Well, there you go,
And
Lululemon. Like Beast Mode apparel now coming soon. Where's the new Beast Mode
yeah,
Lululemon
yeah,
line?
exactly.
There's
Beast mode
something we can.
Kripps, Lululemon.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. We actually, where I'm from in Tasmania, we have a bakery, a brand of bread called Kripps. So if you're ever in the hunt for something with the last name and you want to sell some bread in Australia, I'm sure you could be a spokesperson for a pretty prominent Tasmanian bread company, Justin. So putting it
There you
out there.
go. See, doors opening. That's what it's all about. Doors
You're
opening.
welcome. If you need an extra manager, I'm available. Just on that, in terms of people wanting to stay up to date with what you're going, with all the great stuff you're talking about, obviously moving to that new direction of your career right now, social media, websites, where can people sort of stay up to date with what you're going to be getting on with your life now that you've retired from bobsled?
Yeah, so I've got the same social media. Everything's just Justin Kripps, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And then I'm working on a website. It's going to be called buildmentalmuscle.com, and that is where I'm going to experiment with trying to, teach people, or at least guide people in the right direction as far as this kind of mental performance aspect. It's it's a new kind of project for me. Just it's going to be experimentation. I'm going to put up videos. I'm going to try to build a course and hopefully get feedback from people and try to, hone it into something that people can really use and get value out of, because it was haphazardly put together, like the system that I use for myself. But it's just so valuable having those skills. And so I'm trying to figure out a way to like teach that to, anybody who can benefit from it. And buildmentalmuscle.com might be up by the time the podcast comes out. We'll see.
Indeed, we'll keep an eye. Otherwise, beastmode.com, you could have a side one going on there just in case that
Yeah.
wasn't already taken. Justin, I got to say, this has been an absolute pleasure. You've got this superpower that I'm so glad you're going to be using out there and sharing it with and helping other people with it, because it definitely worked for you. And I think it's definitely something that we look forward to seeing put out there for other people. But congratulations on an absolutely amazing career in the sport of bobsled. Very much has been a pleasure having you on the show today, learning a little bit more about that. And I'll go talk to those people at Kripps Bakery, and we'll also hook you up, and they can do some mindless exercises with some bread as well, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. That sounds great. I appreciate you having me on the show, and it's been a lot of fun.